So Rana, the recording is on. You come off mute. We can get cracking. Rana, I think you're still on mute.
Somebody has muted me. Sorry.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this workshop. Thanks, Matt, for your introduction. We have a very packed agenda, so I'm just going to jump into this directly, and I will share some slides to introduce us. So this is a workshop involving civil society in energy and grid planning. This is a workshop that is organized from our side as part of the PAC process. The colleagues from the Renewables Grid Initiative are going to explain this further, but it's a workshop organized in collaboration with the Green Grids Initiative, IRENA, and the Renewables Grid Initiative. So very happy to join forces here. Very quickly on the agenda, without going into detail, welcome opening remarks. That's where we are. I should probably say who I am. I'm Rana Deep. I'm heading REN21, the Renewable Energy Pulse Network for the 21st century. We will have some inspiring presentations on different experiences from how to basically really make energy planning and grid planning something that is also supported by civil society. So with the presentation of the energy transition book, IRENA long-term energy scenario network, and the PAC project. I'll introduce the speakers, and we'll lead directly into panel discussions where we'll have some input from different experiences. So very quickly, who we are. So REN21 Renewables Now. We're the local community of renewable energy actors from science and academia, NGOs, governments, and industry. I always say like this is the messiness of multi-stakeholder, but it's also the strengths because you have a diversity of perspectives. And these are necessary because we are not only speaking about a fuel switch, but about putting renewable energy at the heart of economy and society. And the topic of the workshop clearly shows that there is a need to involve different perspectives. There is a community of more than 4,000 players, and we work with all those players to really tap into decentralized intelligence, build decentralized intelligence through crowdsourced information, and that is also used and for shaping dialogue and debates and communication. We have a very integrated approach. So building on the community, really this integration of knowledge, dialogue and debate and communication, because great data is fundamental, but not enough if it sits on a board. So it is also about making it available to the larger public. Now, what is important to keep in mind, and I think this is exactly why it is so important that we're having the discussions we're having today. The reality is, we are still operating in a fossil fuel-based system. And these are basically the developments between 2011 and 2021. We see the high share of fossil fuel. We clearly know that we need to ramp up massively, basically the renewable energy capacities. So on the generation side, we need to accompany the energy use side, and we need grids and infrastructure. So this is fundamental. And this also means that basically with a large electrification and deep electrification of energy sectors like transport and heating, grids become even more important. I think the last IEA assessment have basically indicated that there is a need to double the existing global grids, which is a massive undertaking. Civil society can really contribute in a very important way to ensure that these developments are happening. And I think this is really what is needed. What is very clear with regard to this is what I mentioned before. It's not only about a fuel switch, so we need to build market acceptance and community acceptance here. Now, if we're really honest on the grid side, grid planning is quite complex. It's quite technical, and how there is a big question on how do we ensure societal support? How do we ensure that civil society can really contribute important perspectives to the energy policy and grid planning processes? It's about scenarios, it's about planning and complicated processes. And these are very often not designed in a way that they are accessible to civil society. So how do we bridge this? And I think this is exactly the discussions we're going to explore more here. So maybe to underline why this is so important, the transitions we're talking about from 80% of fossil fuel to 100% of renewable energy clearly means that there is a fundamental need to have the support. Otherwise, if we're not investing in this, this might basically fire back and we're not able to deliver on our objectives. Very quickly on the PAC Consortium, the project, which Leah and Andre are going to present later. It's the Paris Agreement compatible scenarios for energy infrastructure. We're in the second phase of the project, so there was a first one. The partners here are REN21, the European Environmental Bureau, the Renewables Grid Initiative, and Can Europe. And again, this workshop is basically part of part of this this project. Sorry, it was now. So much from my side, very much looking forward to the discussions and the presentations. We'll start with the first part, which was about the presentation, and I'm inviting Marcus Stewart to the panel. Not the panel, to the presentation spot, so to say, the virtual one. Marcus is the lead of the Green Grids Initiative at the UK Department of Energy and Security. He will introduce the electricity transition playbook. Marcus, over to you.
Hi there. Hi there, everybody. Just checking you can see my slides. Can I get a thumbs up from someone?
Yes, all good.
Super. Thank you. Right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Yeah, my name's Marcus Stewart, and I lead the Green Grids Initiative on behalf of the UK government. Just quickly on the Green Grids Initiative, we were launched at COP26. We've got an ecosystem of partners and organisations that we work with, and our main aim is to help the delivery of grids to unlock and deliver renewables. You cannot deliver the energy transition without grids. In fact, we have a catchphrase: there's no transition without transmission. And our role is really to try and unlock and unblock grid projects, both within country and large interconnector projects as well. We work currently we're working in the Asia Pacific region and also in Africa on a number of projects and enabling projects to help those projects. But what I want to talk about today is the electricity transition playbook. This was
put it in presentation mode. They're not in presentation mode yet.
This was a tool that we are developing to help governments and to help policymakers to actually plan the transition of electricity systems. We'll be launching it in a few weeks' time at COP28. And it really, what it does, it brings together sort of global knowledge on 9 key building blocks around the delivery of grid infrastructure and electricity systems. So it starts with long-term vision. You need to know where you're going to get to, what policies and laws and legislation you need to then deliver that, what the market and the delivery mechanisms need to bring on that renewable generation and storage and other technologies, the network infrastructure, planning, delivery, thinking big, thinking about the long term. We've got to build a huge amount of grid infrastructure, so you need to start with the end in mind. You need to be able to operate it as well. The first thing system operators will tell you is around high renewables is it's really difficult to make the grids work, so that's a blocker. So what are the things that you can do to unblock that? But we also need technologies to support the rollout of the new energy system. So you need digital, you need data, you need telecoms networks to work with the energy infrastructure. So you need to think about those enabling technologies. We also need to bring in people. and the consumers and the people who are affected by that. And this is what we're going to talk about today. You also need to understand the supply chain. You need to be able to build the new energy system, both the grids, the solar panels, the wind farms, but you also need the skills and the workforce. So it suddenly becomes an industrial strategy question for governments as well, in terms of where they're going to get those resources from and how they're going to do it. And finally, you have to be able to finance it. You've got to be able to afford to fund it. So the playbook brings this all together and acts as a tool, as a guide, as a training tool that, say, ministers, ministries and officials can go through to really understand the key elements that they need to put together, but also where to find help and also who's doing what of it, because we're bringing together, as I said, sort of best practice from around the globe. So moving on to sort of the impact on consumers and public participation, I want to just cover a couple of the chapters in the playbook today to give you a bit of a feel for it, but also sort of I guess take us into the debate and the discussion today. So first off, I just want to sort of highlight a quote from Damilola Ugambayi, who's the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. In a recent report, she said, governments worldwide must put consumer empowerment into national energy plans in a fair and inclusive manner and help them understand how to benefit from clean energy consumption. I couldn't have said it better myself, really. The consumer is at the heart of the energy transition, and we need to think of it that way. So when we go through the playbook, one of our chapters, I'm starting with chapter 7. We don't have to read these in order, but chapter 7 is around public participation and support. And here, we identify the rationale for bringing people in at an early stage, share some good practice around that. We talk about things like citizens' assemblies, the role of prosumers, engagement strategies for different consumer groups and how to bring them on board, how to link in with NGOs. And that's a fundamental part of the playbook in terms of a lot of the chapters. You need to be having that engagement strategy. You need cross-government strategies. You need public-facing strategies in order to do it. You need community engagement strategies. So a key message that comes through the playbook is that, you need to think about this early in the game. And that takes us on to the scenarios and the long-term vision, because you need to know where you're getting to, where you want to get to, what the potential is. And bringing stakeholders into that conversation is vitally important. In my previous role, I used to lead the scenario planning work for National Grid in the UK. And when I started doing that about 10 years ago, we used to produce these long-term scenarios, and we would publish them. We'd send them to the government, we'd send them to the regulator, but we didn't really engage with anybody on building them. And then over time, we realized it was really important to speak to our stakeholders, speak to the companies that were connecting to the grid, speaking to the people who were using the energy. And then the group got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when I finished working on that in about 2019, we had 200 different organizations who were feeding directly into the scenario work. And around about 450 stakeholders would come to our meetings and engage with us. Last year, the same process is still running. There's now over 360 different organizations feeding into that work and over 1,000 stakeholders just feeding into this one thing. But that sets the start, that sets the work for the plan. It really gets that engagement, and we can get that understanding of the impact it has on organizations, but also what they need to see out of the process as well. So I think that's a great way of bringing in the stakeholders right at the start. And I'll just touch on one other area before I wrap up, because I know we haven't got much time, is when you have to build the grids as well. Having grids and infrastructure in your locality has an impact on the community. So it's really important that the communities understand the needs of why that infrastructure is getting built, have some involvement in the decision around the planning and the engagement, and again at an early stage. And also, if they can have some skin in the game, it makes the whole process easier to deliver. And I'm just going to quote one example that we came across when we were looking at this section, is that in the US, the Southern California and Edison transmission company were building an overhead line, and it needed to cross a Morongo Indian reservation. The alternative was to go around it, which would have cost about another $500 million. And so they negotiated with the Indian community, the reservation community, and they created a deal where the community part owned the asset. And also they created a 30-year leasing deal and rate deal so that they could get an income, which enabled the community then to fund their part of it. That enabled the cables or the overhead lines to be built, avoided the additional costs which would have affected the consumers generally, and you've got what could have been a problem has turned into an asset, really. So examples like that I think are really important to feed into the discussions, and governments and transmission companies really need to sort of come in with their eyes open and that kind of strategy. So those are some of the highlights that we cover in the training. I'm just going to wrap up now and let you know what we're doing with the playbook. As I said, we're launching it at COP 28. It's going to be we're going to do an event on the 6th of December in the Global Renewables Hub. We're running some training events next year. We're doing one in Brazil in January. We're hoping to go to Ghana, and also we're doing one in Italy later in the summer. The material is going to be available online. And so find out more about it. You can click onto our website, and when we get some updates, we'll be providing those. So I'm going to really wrap up now because I know we've got lots to talk about. So thank you for listening, and please come and engage with the playbook and the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. And can I just say, as our first speaker of the day, what impeccable timing that is. Excellent. Thank you so much. We've got some time now because Marcus, you actually finished slightly ahead of time, which is really appreciated, because now we can have a little bit more time to ask the audience, ask our colleagues if anybody has any kind of questions or reflections or anything that they want to throw in, because I can see some bits that are popping up already in the chat. But if you want to ask Marcus, please do raise your hand and go for it. And whilst I'm scanning the chat, Rana, have you got any reflections that you want to kick us off with?
I guess for me, 3 parts. There is no transition without transmission. That's one part. The other one, putting the consumers at the heart, I think, or in the center. I think that's really something. Very often we tend to come from the energy supply side, and we forget this. So I think this is really important. And the third one is when you mentioned basically the statistics. I think like engaging with 1,000 players, I think we will need to explore more and more how we really manage collaborative processes and build real ownership, because this is a big undertaking. So some thoughts from my side.
Thanks, Rana. Thanks. And I'm just scanning the chat, and one thing that sort of popped up early on in your presentation, Marcus, was from Florian, who says acceptance of local communities is critical for successful implementation of large-scale grid infrastructure. Florian, is there anything else you want to throw into that sort of conversation? And Marcus, what would your response be?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it's a real challenge because sometimes the plans aren't that formed, and once you draw a line on the map, it gets very emotive very quickly. I mean, in the UK, there's a lot of work that has to be done to bring on offshore wind from the East Coast, and it's a huge engagement process that's happening and kicking off, and there's a number of parties involved in that, and I'm going to be frank, it's not perfect. It's not going brilliantly. And because, it's a very emotive subject, but we've got to learn from this, and we've got, you've got to tell people the truth. You've got to give them options, and you've got to have that conversation. And, the earlier you can do that, I think the better, really. And oh, sorry, I seem to have muted there. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, so I think that's it's critically important and become more and more important. And that's why we had that as one of the the 9 building blocks within the playbook, really, because we saw that and from the people we've spoken to as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got time for one more, and a question has just popped in. And of course, there's going to be more questions than we can answer in the time that we've got. But one of the questions that's come in is that asks, what about renewable energy with green hydrogen?
In relation to, I mean, the playbook is around electricity. So it's not focusing on hydrogen. I mean, hydrogen is an energy carrier. It's not a form of energy in itself. I mean, when you're looking at energy planning, the role of hydrogen is important in terms of grid balancing and energy storage, and I think that's an important role. And when you're looking at scenario elements at the start and the market elements, that's where it comes in. So that's an important thing. And one of the, they say we've started with the electricity transition playbook, we're launching it. We are hoping to expand it to other vectors as well as time goes on, but that's a plan rather than a certainty at this stage. But we would like to do whole system, obviously, but you've got to start somewhere.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks. I appreciate your presentation and responding to the questions. Before we move on, can I just thank Marcus? Thank you again, Marcus. And also, before I hand over to Rana, just ask our audience, whilst the presentations are happening, if you can just double check that you're muted, just in case the phone rings in the background or anything like that, and it sort of distracts the speaker. That's best avoided. So thank you very much for doing that in advance. And also to say, let's make use of that chat function. The chat gets saved, so all these great questions and comments and the networking that happens is kept and used. So it's all really great stuff. So thank you. Rana, we are bang on time, so I'm going to ask you to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ned. So as next speaker, we have Nadim Goussous. He's Associate Program Officer at IRENA, and will actually introduce the work about the IRENA Long-Term Energy Scenario Network. Also, that is focusing on participatory processes for developing national long-term energy scenario. Nadim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rana. 1 second, I'll just quickly share my screen then. There we go. Can you see it?
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, perfect. So yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone joining us here today. And hello. So I'll present some early findings from our current work on participatory processes in developing long-term energy scenarios today. But just a quick note that Marcus, your presentation actually was very interesting on the playbook. I think our project here really fits nicely within what the objective and vision is here. So I think we'll have some nice opportunities to collaborate in the future. But to not waste any time as well from my side, my name is Nadim Goussous, and I'm representing the Energy Planning and Power Sector Transformation Team at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. If you don't know, maybe IRENA is an intergovernmental organization that serves as a platform for international cooperation on the energy transition, and supporting countries and providing research and analysis to advance the transition to a renewable energy-based system. So this project comes in the context of this work stream at IRENA that we're coordinating called the Long-Term Energy Scenarios Network, or LTS Network. That's the acronym I'll use. The LTS Network is a platform it's a global platform to exchange good practices and experiences on developing and using long-term energy scenarios. This is done by promoting a more effective and wider, more widespread, let's say, use of scenarios and development of scenarios to achieve in pursuit of the clean energy transition. Let's say this is not. We aim to really try to focus this within this more advanced, more complex challenges that are happening when developing long-term energy scenarios in the current context. This is done through different dialogue events and that we engage with members and partners and experts around the world. We've held over 70 different activities so far, and we aim to synthesize all of these good practices, all of these experiences in different reports as well to share with the wider audiences. At the moment, we have 29 member countries, so represented by governments and government institutions, and 12 technical partner institutions. Those are institutions that support countries with developing and using LTES. So within this LTS network, the work streams are really defined by the members and partners here. So the topic of participatory processes, of communication with different stakeholders as well, has been really highlighted as a priority almost every year. We get that in our annual surveys as a really important priority for governments. Most members and partners have also really indicated the high interest in joining and collaborating with this work stream, which really shows, I think, the importance governments around the world are placing on this topic at the moment. And in parallel as well, we also see this activity, a lot more activity on this topic in the scientific community. There are more journal papers and projects being done now to explore how stakeholder engagement can shape their own models and scenarios within this scientific community, but also on how it can support planning at the local and national levels. So you can see some examples here on publications coming out in this topic, and we're really seeing a lot more momentum on this topic, which is very good to see. Throughout these surveys and throughout engagement with the different members and partners, we've also learned a lot about what they're prioritizing here. What questions are they asking and what would they like to explore? So, I mean, this is a very busy slide, sorry, but maybe I just highlighted here some of the questions that are more relevant to this topic of civil society and public participation. So countries are asking, how do you keep stakeholders consistently engaged throughout this planning process? How do you effectively communicate this complex technical energy system, jargon and information to the public? How do you coordinate stakeholder involvement and buy-in? How do you converge the different positions into something that you can use in your plan? And how do you select the stakeholders? And I'd like to use this presentation just to highlight 3 examples that we've seen from countries that have participated so far in this work stream, some good examples. So we've done a lot of activities. It's been on this topic for the past few years. So I'm just mentioning some that have popped up in recent months, but just to say we'll have a lot more that we're compiling in this project, which will release soon, and I'll talk about that later. But for example, one interesting example we've seen is from Chile, one of our country members. Chile has their long-term energy planning process. There's a great focus there on citizen involvement, with clear efforts being made, for example, to include minority and women. And the important part here is the fact that it's kind of legislated. There's a team dedicated to performing these activities. There's a clear institutional focus on conducting, deep and meaningful engagement with the public. You can see here, for example, this is a screenshot from their website, from the Ministry of Energy, on how they're advertising those public participation activities in workshops and hearings. And they keep an open registry for voluntary involvement in these projects, which keeps an open line, let's say, of communication with the public. And in their discussions as well, in our discussions with them, they've also highlighted the importance here of having a multidisciplinary team doing it. It's not only the energy experts that are doing it necessarily, but really bringing in experts in political and social sciences and economics, etc., that they can bring into these discussions and try to gather the insights from the public into their long-term plans. Another example as well is is from Ghana. So they had this very strong engagement process as well during their development of scenarios. This was presented by the Energy Commission of Ghana. They've highlighted how physical meetings for them seem to work best. They found it fosters more transparency and more acceptability with directly engaging in person with people, with community leaders in different regions. And they've highlighted that as, in their experience, a good way to really facilitate this and build this relationship and trust, which, while time consuming, is a very important aspect of a successful participatory process. And you can see that within the diagram here, where they have different phases for stakeholder consultation within their planning process. And finally, we have here an example more on the communication side. I include communication because it's not necessarily just an outcome of this planning process, but rather we see this stakeholder engagement process as a collaboration. So there's communication going 2 ways. And from the Belgian side, for example, in their low carbon Belgium by 2050, they developed this My 2050 tool, which is a kind of a calculator to help citizens envision and visualize their own transition scenarios. It's kind of a gamified version of communicating all this scenario work, this usually complex and very, Excel and work that might not be very interesting to people, to the wider public. This tool was developed through specialized workshops conducted in different sectors to shape really the tool and how it works. But then the outcome of it, there was a lot of special outreach to students. They've engaged over 20, 30,000, I think just 21,000 actually, students here, secondary level students, to really inspire them to actively participate in the energy transition that they want to see. But they've also put in a lot of work as well in training teachers as well in how to best use these tools to reach the students. So it's an example of how you can include public participation as an outcome as well of the scenario work, and maybe ensure more sustainability of this public outreach as well moving forward with your iterative planning processes. I'll go quickly because I think I'm running out of time, but just on that, so as I mentioned, we've done about 5 or 6 events specifically on this topic now. And we've had some findings that I've kept here that are relevant maybe just to the topic of public participation. So this includes the prerequisites to have a successful process. And what we see is very important to have institutional support for engagement. This means formally developing legislation or committees, teams to support this public participation and outreach process. While emphasizing transparency of the objectives of these as well from the beginning. Throughout the data collection and modeling phases, here it's a very technical phase, and it's important to address the knowledge gap, the technical knowledge gap that can exist between the public, the general public, and the modelers here, while using this interdisciplinary approach that I mentioned before. Throughout the stakeholder engagement itself as well, collaboration, this two-way collaboration highlighted before, always comes up as this is important. It's not a one-way, we're just getting your inputs and that's it, but it's really kind of a collaborative process that should be fostered, while also prioritizing citizens and civil society voices. This is not necessarily always the case, but countries have highlighted as well how this has been important for them. While here, it's important as well to note that within that, you need to navigate these power dynamics, the louder voices sometimes in the room that can exist, and try to develop consensus as well throughout that. And I think we'll hear a bit more as well from the panelists and from Andre and Leah as well on some experiences there. And finally, when finalizing these planning processes, it's important to use this as well to really balance this support from the public and decision makers. Here, this is while bringing them in the room together, but also, to try to really balance it and not give too much. For example, how do you say it? It's a balancing act that needs to be. You get the public support as well, while having actionable plans that can, decision makers are likely to take through and act on it.
Nadeem, one more minute.
Yeah. This is my final slide and a half, let's say. So within that, so we're working now on this toolbox on participatory processes. This is a work stream that we started earlier this year, collaborated with some of the people here on this call on this, and we are trying to collect these case studies, these best practices, to develop a toolbox that can be useful for planners in developing their participatory strategies for their planning cycles. As I mentioned, we're collaborating a lot with different countries, different experts, scientific committees as well, and we hope to launch this in April 2024. And as part of this as well, just a small announcement that we have an event next week. It's hybrid and in Bonn. If you are interested in joining this in person or virtually, please reach out to me. You'll have my email in the next slide, and I'll put it in the chat. And this is in partnership with the IECP, and the focus here is really how to use this stakeholder engagement to develop more just energy transition scenarios, and let's say overcome these gaps as well that can exist in incorporating these socio-political challenges and transitions into scenarios that can be more reflective of reality, essentially. So with that, thank you very much. Apologies for going over time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adim. And please do put your contact into the chat, because I know that people will be able to just cut and paste that really quickly. So that would be great. Thank you. And you did actually in your presentation kick off quite a conversation in the chat that you're probably going to want to have a look at later on. And people were building on a question. So Florian asked a question: did you address the challenge that the strongest possibility for stakeholder engagement is typically in the early stages, whereas public interest is strongest when construction is already starting, which encouraged Andrea to follow up with, building on Florian's question, what did you learn from the different experiences about the challenge of length of the process?
I think this is something we're exploring at the moment. One issue that we're seeing, of course, is that planning cycles sometimes can be quite short, and within that time, it's really hard to get meaningful stakeholder engagement within these strict deadlines, and sometimes the planning institutions can have. So we've seen that, for example, an example for Ghana, there's the iterative planning process is there, which means even if, for example, it's an annual planning process, you'll still get meaningful responses year on year. This doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be reflected in the same master plan or energy plan, but it really helps build on this a more sustainable kind of engagement throughout this planning process. So again, the importance of kind of ensuring a sustainable and a sustainable process, a sustainable rather than kind of a one-off process is important here. But I agree, it is a challenge that I would love to hear as well from, from Rosalina today maybe, and from others as well, and how they're doing.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Dean. Great presentation. Thank you for responding to some of those questions and kicking off the conversation that's now happening in the chat. And again, I encourage everybody to keep that conversation going throughout in the chat, because this is really great. This is really important, really great conversation. I'm going to thank you again, Nadim, and hand over to Rana. Rana.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks a lot, Nadim. Actually, while we're talking about this, and especially with the Belgium example, I thought from Renton one side, we're doing AI-based visualization. So reboot the world on how we imagine, because we need to visualize the future we're building to get action going now. And I actually thought it would be really interesting to link this Brussels example with the AI-based visualization, because this might be an entry point to bridge also the fact that citizens engagement and civil society engagement needs to happen in a moment where the infrastructure work is not happening yet and doesn't have an impact. So maybe something to explore. So
definitely, that sounds very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. So thanks a lot. And now we come to the third presentation from RGI, Leah Hayes and Andre Seglers. Sorry, I'm not sure. I think I mistreated your name, Andre. Sorry for that. Both program managers, energy systems at RGI, and you will introduce the PAC projectors. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rana, for this introduction, and hello, everyone. My name is Andrzej Ceglarz, and together with my colleague Lea, we are going to present you we will share our experiences as a representative of civil society. How do we act? How do we contribute to the European grid planning process, also including one of the main tools that is the effect of the PAC project, which is the PAC scenario. You will hear a lot of PACs during this presentation, but this is the kind of framework and the family of terms that we are using here. So maybe to give a short introduction who RGI is, what organization we are representing. So Renewables Grid Initiative is a quite unique organization within the landscape of actors aiming at decarbonization, as we are working as collaboration, as association of different climate and environmental NGOs. as well as transmission system operators across Europe. We are concentrating our activities mostly in Europe. However, we are trying to share our knowledge and experiences also with the global audience. That's why we are here today. And as Marcus mentioned in his first presentation, that sometimes or quite often you can hear from the grid operator that it is a problem to integrate renewables. Actually, we are working with those TSOs that are telling that renewables are the solution in order to meet the objectives outlined in the Paris Agreement, and then that in collaboration with other NGOs. As RGI, together with other colleagues with other organizations, we are working in the PAC project, which is Paris Agreement compatible scenarios for energy infrastructure. It is a strong partnership of civil society actors that was established as a reaction to the Paris Agreement. And why was it so? So once the Paris Agreement goals have been achieved to reach the 1.5 target by when it comes to global warming, the attention has shifted on delivery and the implementation. So how actually to do it? Is being recorded. So how actually to do it to achieve this target? And in order to do it, we, among many different shifts in our society, there's also a need to focus on the infrastructure which we need. And for NGOs, the infrastructure matters because it makes a difference what kind of infrastructure or technological choices you made and for how long this infrastructure will stay with you. And there are different spans within the life cycle of different technologies, which of course have their synergies, pros and cons. But in this specific case, civil society moved the attention towards infrastructure. So what was one of the main outputs of the collaboration of the PAC project? So in the first phase of the project, we, as a consortium, we have developed the PAC scenario, which was a joint publication of CAN Europe as well as EEB, with the objectives of the PAC scenarios to have 65% of reduction of greenhouse gases reduction by 2030. And this is everything embedded in the European context to give a better understanding. Net zero greenhouse gases emissions by 2040. And 100% renewables by 2040 in all sectors, with a very strong shift towards electricity as a main factor of energy. In the second phase of the project that started in 2021 and is still ongoing, we, after having the PAC scenario as a tool showing what is the pathway to decarbonize, we're discussing and analyzing what are technical, regulatory, social, environmental, economic conditions that would allow to understand how this scenario shall be implemented. And I'm finishing here and give the floor to Lea.
Thanks, Andre. So yes, I'll now show you a little bit what we identified as steps to involve civil society in system planning. One of the first things we think is really important is give the tools to NGOs and civil society to understand such technical topics. And so we want to inform them to help them improving their knowledge and feel more empowered and taking part into the discussion. We also make sure to kind of initiate the dialogues between very different key stakeholders, from maybe large energy consumers to NGOs to policymakers, to make sure that there is a meaningful discussion that kind of envelop many different point of views. Together with the first points, we make sure that NGOs and civil society also feel like they can take part and are actually taking part in expert discussions, because as we also already mentioned, energy system planning can sound and is extremely complex. So we want to make sure that all parties feel have the knowledge to come into the discussion. A big part of the work is to also making the results digestible and understood by our policymakers. And finally, we try to exchange our best practices with a broader international community as today. But what does it look like in practice? So core part of the PAC scenario building has been to gather point of views together and have a consensus. And this is why the PAC scenario is really valuable, is that we've put a lot of effort, and our colleague from CAN Europe and EEB can attest that it was a big work to achieve this consensus of building a decarbonization scenarios for Europe. In parallel to that, we engage with energy modelers from either the industry side or the academia to understand the models better and also incentivize them to consider other factors than the technical ones, so including environmental and social factors who are usually not involved into these models. As today, we also kind of explain these results in a more global context. And today, as this workshop is one of the examples, but we also share these results in more international conferences and so on. As I mentioned before, one of our partner EEB is putting a lot of effort in translating these results into meaningful messages for policymakers. So we've published quite a lot of policy briefs that you're welcome to look at. And finally, we've done quite a big work into contributing directly into the complex process of the European grid planning. And I'll give a quick look into this right now. So this is, we're trying to explain how, in a simple way, what this process can look like. And I can only shortly say that one of the steps that we took part in is this scenario development within this complex process. And one of them is that there's this TYNDP process, which means to plan the network for the 10 years looking ahead. And our teams have joined forces to join messages and inputs into this process. To close up, I can share key messages. So we hope that PAC project is a best practice as well of trying to involve civil society and give them the power of contributing to national policies, scenario building, and all of these grid planning processes. We hope that the PAC scenarios empower all of these groups in letting them understand what is at stake and let them express their point of views. And finally, we hope that the PAC approach can inspire and not only be within the European context, but maybe the approach could inspire other groups elsewhere. And here are just two upcoming events that my colleagues already mentioned, but I encourage you to take a look at them. One is at COP and one will be online pretty soon. Thank you very much. We are happy to take your questions and our contact if you want to learn more.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I'm just going to just quickly buzz through the audience and just put the mutes on quickly. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for sharing that as well, sort of adding to the sort of dynamism of it. So thank you. And like before, you triggered off some great conversation in the chat. And there was one question that I think it's Paramjeet asked around kind of what strategies can civil society employ to encourage transparency and accountability in the implementation of European grid projects. That's one question that came up. I don't know if you wanted to. I think that was when Andrea, you were talking.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question. I think that there is a difference whether we are talking about, let's say, the participation at the planning stage and the implementation itself, but everywhere data matters. When it comes to planning, two of the strategies is to put political pressures on those who are regulating the planning system to make them push the others to make data transparent and available. And a different strategy is also to increase your own capacities, because then if you understand the issue at stake, although it might be very complex and complicated, and you present some different data or a tool or any other approach, and you invite to a conversation, you have strong arguments how to get into this exchange with the people that are responsible for system planning. So I would say that these are the two strategies that come to my mind. It might be something different that the physical implementation of the project, but I think we don't have so much time to discuss it, but happy to continue the conversation.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much. And like the speakers before, the timing was impeccable, and we're now in a position where the presentations are over, and we're going to move into the panel discussions. And Rana, you are the obvious person to link us with any reflections that you might have from Lee and Andre's presentation into the panel discussion to introduce the panel. So thanks to you both, and Rana, over to you. Oh, the universal sign of you're on mute.
Yeah, I followed your, normally I don't unmute myself. I followed your guidance, and this is what I pay now. So no, I guess like, yeah, thanks a lot to both. It was really interesting because listening to you, I thought like we always, and I think this would be my question to basically all presenters, to see all 4 presenters, which is, we look how to empower, I guess, civil society organization and citizens, and how to train them so that they can understand our processes. And actually, while listening to this, to all of you, I thought like, what do we do to train ourselves so that we can speak and think about our expert lingo and difficult processes in a way that make it actually more accessible? So multidisciplinary approaches, communication, social science people in the modeling world, etc. So I was just thought maybe this is a good idea for PAC 3.0 or a next joint workshop with all these players. Anyway, so thanks a lot to the presenters. I think we'll just have the panel discussion now, and just from the chat, I think we'll all reconvene for a follow-up to really dive into those discussions. So, and all presenters, please stay on board, because we might try to bring you back in if we have time. Here, during the discussions, we're going to look into enablers and barriers for civil society participation in energy and grid planning with some specific experiences. So I'm welcoming here Rosilena Lindo, who is the Undersecretary of Energy, National Secretary of Energy in Panama. Welcome, Rosalinda. Rosilena, sorry.
You can call me Rosie, it's fine.
Like
thank you.
Hello, hi, great that you are with us. Joni Karjalainen, I hope this was better than in the prep, who is the energy transition analyst at the Climate Action Network Europe, and also works very closely with academia. And Irene Varoli, who is project fellow at the World Economic Forum, and has been very active on multi-stakeholder processes. I guess like my first question to all of you is if you could, when you speak for the first time, quickly explain like your experiences in your country and your activities on exactly a civil society participation, but then really focusing also on this question, like from your experience, what are main enablers and what have been main barriers? Because I think this is also, we need to be aware of this so that we can address those and build on those opportunities for future strategies. So, Rosilena, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, for sure. And for me, it's a pleasure. When I heard the name of the panel, I was very excited because I love planning. Policy planning is a wonderful thing to do, but sure, you have to assure that you have the stakeholders involved in your planning, and to do it right, as you said before, the language that you use, the communication tools that you use are key and fundamental to assure that you are going to have a successful path in order to implement the policies that you are building on. And in Panama, since November 2020, the Cabinet Council approved the strategic guidance for the energy transition agenda as a policy instrument to invigorate the energy sector, to adopt the changes required by a participatory, just and equitable manner to continue being a carbon negative country, increasing the use and the production of clean energy. And to achieve that, we create 5 strategies for the power sector, 2 for the hydrocarbon sector. And to do all that, in the last 3 years, we invest around 16,000 hours person of consultation, of workshops, of evaluation with every single actor, civil society, academia, the private sector, the stakeholders within the energy sector and outside the energy sector. But talking about the grids, for an energy transition, you have a grid that have to be fit. So to do that, we start developing 15 months before creating the strategy for innovation in the grid system. We create a white paper in order to set the basis for innovation in the Panama electricity sector, with the objective to analyze and identify those challenges and opportunities of innovation, but also to provide additional information for everybody to start a discussion with a similar level of knowledge of the evolution in the last 25 years of the electricity sector and the different challenge that we had ahead. So we start with the document, we share the document, and then we open monthly workshops and discussions regarding how do we pass from these opportunities in order to have a specific innovation strategy for the interconnected grid system. At the beginning, we set up around more than 70 barriers that we have, and we end up with a strategy with 25 lines of actions in order to build up a better electricity market to face the energy transitions. And while the process was important to highlight that the conversations were longer than expected with the indigenous population, because we had to consider the translation, the understanding of the technological words. How do we speak in Navere as an example, how you build a grid? It is important to find the time, to allocate the time to assure that we are talking the same language. But it's important not only to think about the barriers regarding communication, but also you have to include different opportunities to enhance your policy making, your policy planning, but also you have to revert that information to every single person that contributes to the process. Sometimes it's not easy because you go to a far community that provides so much information and sometimes takes time to revert back. But when you do so, you build a trust and a sense of belonging that your ideas and the people that you are ruling for are part of your team. If we want to really achieve the Paris Agreement, we have to bring more people on hands to assure that the planning that we are doing after we leave the administration are going to continue moving forward.
Thank you so much, Rosalina. I think this already sounds like a really great starting point because the Panama government fully acknowledges how important it is to basically have like this citizen and civil society involvement, which I think is probably a situation that is not always given in all countries. So we'll come back to you, but maybe, Yoni, I'll come to you now. From your experiences, main barriers and opportunities, I guess.
Thanks, Rana. I'll speak a bit of the European perspective and also the European national level perspectives. So you heard about the Paris Agreement compatible scenario work that CAN is conducting with its partners. One of the strengths and the unique values, perhaps, of that process is the wide network and membership basis of the organizations involved. So CAN represents almost 200 social and environmental organizations around Europe, working both at the member state level as well as in the European space. The same for the European Environmental Bureau, again, with large amount of networks, and also the other colleagues here representing their constituencies. So just looking at the wide level of network participation by all partners is certainly one of the enablers for exchange of information through different levels. And also in terms of thinking of scenarios as learning processes. As we heard the colleagues at RGI explaining of some of the different forums and spaces and dialogue spaces where these conversations can take place. Scenarios are quite complex, but they are used. They should be understandable. They should provide something for everyone who understands them. So wider perspectives also. We speak now here mostly within the energy community, and of course energy concerns all of society. But one of the added values is to make the scenarios also speak to the climate community. And one of the specific levers, or a couple of the specific levers in terms of motivation, perhaps, from what we have learned with the PAC project, is a higher level of climate ambition. We know that citizens want to act on climate change. So they also want scenarios which are more ambitious than perhaps the official scenarios that we have out there that are formulated and articulated by the governments. It might also mean challenging the present policy targets and showing what kind of scenarios can be conducted to contribute to that. And maybe as a second point, just to begin with and to kick off, is also to place the energy sector into a wider context. With some of the tools that we are using, we also try and think of the different levers. The PAC scenario is not only a technology-based scenario, it's also about social change and social technical change. And we know that energy transitions are an interplay of the social and the technical. So how can we show with the scenarios that we conduct also the possibility of change to happen? It's not just linear extrapolation or forecasting from the past to the present to the future. We can also open up the spaces for thinking that a different future is really possible. So the role of the scenarios is really to show these different types of elements and then also bring it back to the policymakers to conceptualize. So I'll just maybe finish, for instance, the scenario is far more articulate on energy demand reduction, or how can we look at the different ways energy is used in society and organize around that. So these are just examples of some of the added value that I think civil society can bring into these processes, both at the EU, but also at the national level, where the reality and the real change happens.
Thank you so much, Yoni. I think it's your last comment is also echoing what Nadim has put in the chat, like this really this part on energy efficiency and demand management. And if we are honest, this is probably one of the first things that is really important to any citizens, is like, how much do I pay for my bills? So that's probably quite an interesting entry point. Say, like, this is my energy demand, and what do we need to put in place as infrastructure to respond to it? Irene, you have worked on a multi-stakeholder process, and maybe if you can also tap into this, so develop some key pillars of what needs to be implemented. I think Yoni also mentioned another aspect, which I find really interesting, is like this tapping into networks that can basically triple down and you see like a multipliers. Is this something you looked into too? But
yeah. Thank you, Rana. Yeah, so what we do at the World Economic Forum is to convene multi-stakeholder groups to help mobilize collaborative action to address the goals of the clean energy transition. And one of the key themes that we are now addressing is community engagement, because it's becoming increasingly important. And if we just think about the massive scale up of renewables, particularly solar and wind, but also grids that's needed in the coming decades, it is clear that this infrastructure will intersect with population centers, but also natural ecosystem, and therefore it is important to manage correctly this impact. If this is not done, the business risk losing their social license to operate, and there is already evidence of this if we look at increasing oppositions that's causing delays or even cancellation of the projects. On the other hand, if this is done right, there is an enormous opportunity to create value, not just for the business, but also for the wider system, including the environment, the economy, and the society. So one of the key challenges that we hear from our stakeholders is that there is not a unique template for community engagement, and this is because there are different, a lot of variables involved and different, local context. But there are best practices, and we've grouped them into what we call 3 pillars for successful engagement. The first one is that it's important to understand and respect the local context. So starting from mapping the different stakeholders, listening to the needs, the concerns, and also the interests, and also use the local knowledge to improve the engagement process itself, but also the project design. Second is it's important for the business to engage early when changes to the project are still possible, and also to engage in a transparent and meaningful way. And finally, I would say for business, important to focus on creating shared value. So this starts from acknowledging that every project will have an impact, and this impact has to be minimized or compensated where it's not possible to eliminate it. But also, like, it's important to go beyond this and have a plan for sharing some of the benefits to the community, and this can happen in different forms. Another challenge, I would say, is that there is not a clear definition and a framework for measuring social impact. So this is something that we should work on, and that business, but also all the different stakeholders should collaborate on, because it would be super relevant for business to, improve the engagement process and get guidance, for government to define their standards, but also for the communities to have more transparency and being able to compare. So these are some of the key highlights of a white paper that we've been working on, and that we will launch a COP, which is really looking and calling for a new approach to community engagement.
Thank you so much, Irina. Maybe before coming to Rosilina, a question back to you, because I think you brought up a point I found really interesting, is how do we measure social impact? And very often we start measuring social impact when we already have a crisis and we have a pushback and delays, etc. So did you look into ways of measuring social impact in a positive way, so that we also have the positive narratives?
Yeah, so it is complex. So it's not as simple as measuring carbon emissions, because all the communities are different, and also their communities change over time. So it's not they're not static. So we think that it would be important to have metrics that measure like broader outcomes, such as, job creation, air quality improvement, health improvement, improvement in the infrastructure, and so on. But it would probably also be necessary to have some metrics and indicators that are local and are relative to the specific geography. And these metrics could be defined together in the consultation process, so engaging the community also in the definition of these metrics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So, Rosilina, you had your hands up very soon. Well,
yes. I just want to take advantage of this global space in order to share with you one of the things that really keep me up at night. Right now, we are implementing the universal access to energy strategy, and one of the lines, the first line, is to develop the electrification plan. Here in Panama, we have around 58,000 families without access to electricity, and around 100,000 families that live in energy poverty. But right now, we are facing the impact of climate change. We have to assure that the grids that we have and the grids that we are going to be building have to be strong enough to face those extreme weather events. But also, we know that our nights are warmer than ever and going to be warmer in the future, that those families that we have to provide electricity, and we have to consider also electricity to cook, to assure that they have clean cooking also. They deserve to have also clean cooling. They deserve to have grid strong enough to assure that they are going to be comfortable to be in their homes and to work in those the process of planning that have to be by isolated systems or mini grids or the expansion of the grid. But how you are going to pay for that? How you are going to assure that additional cost of the adaptations of the grids and the future mini grids that we are building and trying to build right now? This is important. This is fundamental. You have to plan thinking about the current necessity and the evolution of the future necessities, including the impact of climate change. And that for us is the cost is rising. And then we have to assure that the international cooperation and the different allies also think together in order not only to build a solution for Panama, but every single country that is facing the same situation as us. It's not responsible and not ethic to build a new grid just thinking to put a few lights and that's it. So I just want to bring that to the subject, because we are serving our community, and it's clear that they are having needs that they are not able to identify now, but we can do it for them.
Thank you, Rosalina. I think that's a very important point, like this part of universal energy access, energy poverty, but also increasing energy demand and resilience. Maybe a question to Yoni and Irene, building on this, basically, it's like, because often when we think about the scenarios and modeling, we'll think about the energy infrastructure more, if you like. But there is indeed, and I think, Rosalina, it's very important that you highlight this, an economic component to it. To what extent are there any experiences that this is also taken into account, that whatever is there is reflected in economic modeling and finance modeling of the countries, of stakeholders? And in the chat, there was another part, because economic can be seen at the national level, but then also there is a direct impact, basically, of social licensing. Irina, you had mentioned it, on the businesses and the business models. So if you could reflect on the economic component. Yoni, why don't you start?
Sure, happy to. And thanks. I think this is actually a really interesting question, and it can be looked at both from more narrowly from the energy system perspective, but also from the wider perspective. What does the energy transition mean for society? And maybe just on the latter part, like besides looking at the specific costs of technologies and what will everything cost, what are the energy system costs? What we are actually trying to also do with the current second phase of our scenario work is that, yes, we will look at the energy demand and the supply side, but we have a specific component which looks at the co-benefits, the social and economic aspects of the energy transition, which tries to look at the costs of inaction. So what happens if we actually don't do anything? What are the costs for society? What is the environmental damage cost? But also on the benefit side, what are the actual benefits and the economic value with the energy transition? So besides articulating in energy sector terms, also aiming to have the scenario speaking to a wider audience and policymakers outside the energy community, so to make it more understandable and relatable also on economic and social terms. So I think that could be also part of the answer in terms of creating more dialogue between different stakeholders who also would look at them from their particular perspective.
Thank you, Yoni. Irina.
And I would say that maybe it seems faster and easier for business in the short term not to engage. But then what we see is that in the long term, if engagement is not done in the proper way, then there is opposition, there are delays, there are cancellation of projects, and this has a monetary impact also on the profitability of the business to operate. There can also be like even risk of reputation, legal battles, and so on. So it's very important for the business to engage from the beginning and allow for communities to take part in the decision-making process. And as I was saying, this can also improve the design of the project itself. So we've heard of examples where the developer, by listening to the local community, local conservation group, could improve the project to also have like good outcomes for the local fauna and, you know, like the local environment. And for this to happen, it is important that in the business, all the units have a clear mandate for this, because what happens often is that you have the sustainability team, which is maybe it's evaluated based on the success of, you know, the engagement process, but then maybe the business development team has different KPIs and it's only evaluated based on the number of projects that are in the pipeline. So it's important that all divisions in the company have the same mandate and work together to get to the same outcome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe building on this directly, the same mandate. Obviously, when we look at local impacts and local empowerment, local and subnational governments have a key role to play, but depending on the governance in the country, they are empowered or not empowered. So if you could maybe share your thoughts on this. And Rosalina, I'll start with you. What is the situation in Panama? How do you involve local subnational governments, but also business?
I'm happy that you raised the question because I have a wonderful example for you. We are right now going more deeply during the building process of consultation for a new law to promote the energy transition, democratization, institutional strengthening, and improvement of the quality of the public electric service in Panama. In Panama, 20 years ago, we lived the sectoral reform that gave birth to the privatization of the electricity sector, and we want to build right now a new era for the democratization of the electricity sector. And this implies adjustments in the way we plan, we operate, we regulate, we produce and consume electricity, which must be evaluated jointly in a planned manner so that not only Panama, the companies and the citizens overcome those challenges. And that's why after preparing the different strategies of the energy transition, we evaluate that the 30% of those lines of action that are 242 lines of action, the 30% needs to assure a adjustment on regulation. And we work in this bill after those process of consultation where we were clear what the people was wanting to change. But after the building of this proposal, we went not only to bring the discussion within the main city, we went to the indigenous areas, we went to province near Costa Rica, near Colombia, to everywhere, asking the agricultural sector, asking to the commerce and service sector, asking the leaders of the local communities, do you think that this is feasible? Do you think that this is possible? Do you think that we could include something else? And to do so, we developed a really clear plan of how this bill will bring benefits and co-benefits to each region that we want to have this conversation. And were long conversations, and they were very clear of what they wanted, and also very clear about what was not working in the current scheme that we have. So after that strong process that was also not only made by the Energy Secretariat with the support of EIDB, with the support of UNDP, but also with the support of the local governments that bring the people to the areas of discussions, we developed a resume of the findings that we arise in that process. We make videos of those findings and we revert to them with this information. And after that, we adapted again the bill and we create a drive and we put it on the web. Okay, here is the matrix of the 92 articles that we want to build. Please tell me, are you thinking that this will work or not? And people were very actively commenting and changing article by article. So after that process, and we found a media of the requirements for the law, we are just waiting for the presidency approval of this new proposal in order to present it to the Congress.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think what is really important is like this part, that the participatory process also leads indeed to regulatory changes, policy and regulatory changes, because otherwise it might even reduce like the engagement. And I think another point you also highlighted, basically the benefits for the local region, for sectors, for the different stakeholders, which also show that even in a local or subnational, national level, there's really this need of a very targeted outreach, narratives, mobilization, and probably also benefit stories. Maybe Irene, I'll start with global, because I think the local and subnational government context is a bit different in Europe. So what is your view on this, or your experiences from all the global activities you've done?
Yeah, so what we hear from our stakeholders, first, we look at the ecosystem and we think that all the different stakeholder groups should be working together. And there's clearly a role for the government as well in this. And what we hear is that, for instance, many developers would like to have non-price criteria in the renewable tenders, or even like, industry guidelines that even if they're not legally binding, but still they can help guide business decisions. Another role that the government could play is in facilitating the engagement process for the communities, because often communities don't have the resources or even the technical skills to engage in a meaningful way in the consultations. And here is where government can support. Local government, on the other hand, as a good understanding on the local context, so can help business identify what good looks like for that specific area. And in some cases can also play the role of being a trusted third party that facilitates the collaboration between the business developers and the civil society or the communities.
Thank you, Irina. Konrad, actually, I'm asking you whether you would agree to join us here on the panel and ask your question. While Yoni, because I think it's an important question on stakeholder empowerment also means like how do we empower in a good way, right? But maybe before you ask a question, Yoni, what are your thoughts on subnational governments and city governments, and what can we learn from the European quite specific situation where they have a legal role, I guess, like?
That's a really interesting question. And I have to say that when it comes to city level and subnational level, as a European organization that coordinates many national actors, maybe I'll answer it indirectly. What we try to do with our current work is to empower with our scenarios. Actually, one of the reasons that what our members asked was, can you bring the more European level scenario work that you do to the national level? And similar questions we are also facing. It's great that we have these top-down elements, but can we connect it to the real questions in cities? Can we connect more transmission level perspectives, for instance, with the more distribution level perspectives? So it is indeed about connecting these different types of scales. And it could be that one tool and one view cannot cover everything. But that's when we need to then connect these different people and audiences together to have an exchange, to build that joint understanding, so that these can come together. This is obviously always a challenge, but I think there's also a great opportunity there to advance work on that front, to have a more integrated view.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that's a super important point. And I'm just also thinking when we speak at city level, it's also like, how do we connect to district heating networks, district heating cooling networks? How do we connect to electric charging stations, public transport, etc.? So it's lots of aspects. We look at the same thing from different perspectives. So Konrad, you brought a very interesting point to the discussion. So I thought it would be great to have you with us. Why don't you go ahead and ask a question?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't want to rain on the parade, but I believe it's good as we focus on effective ways of broad participation that we are conscious of the risk that some of the stakeholders will use their power of endorsement and approval for private interest, rent seeking, or other call it corruption, which can actually, for the developer or investor, put a real dilemma, a major delay of processes, or joining into an basically bottomless pit of vicious circle of joining in there. And so I would really enjoy to get here the international good practices, how to design a process to minimize opportunities, not obviously completely eliminate, but to minimize. And it's certainly a question where the group I'm involved with is PTF, is the Trust Fund for Transparency, is looking for practical approaches which have effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Konrad. Think like power dynamics and corruption. So who wants to jump into this hot topic? Who wants to jump first? You'll all need to jump.
I can start. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I think transparency is very important and can reduce the problem. And to improve transparency in the process, one solution is to use digital tools. Digital tools can streamline the process, can improve the efficiency, can improve information management, can improve collaboration, but can also improve transparency. And to address this, an example is the World Economic Forum is collaborating with Accenture, AWS, and Wind Europe to develop a digital tool to streamline the permitting process and and also provide more transparency. So I think that could be a way to kind of help solve for it, but happy to hear other views.
Thank you, Irina. Yoni, maybe just to be aware, we have 3.5 minutes left and Andre having his hand up, so if we can keep it short.
Great. Well, the role of civil society in any country and any context is to challenge the current discussions. So certainly that's one for checks and balances and any kinds of misbehavior. So that's certainly that many civil society organizations do and have to continue pushing. That's one. Secondly, I think the issue of data was also a good point, and also in the context of today's discussions, there are still too many assumptions when it comes to modeling scenarios in terms of kind of being black box exercises, so it's difficult for citizens to see into them. So having everything as open data, open access, open source even, yeah, those are some of the possibilities to, at least on the level of data and information exchange, to improve, but the power dynamics are something to always be mindful of.
It's just 1 minute. I think that transparency is fundamental. You have to pursue a balance in power, not only in the market, in the electricity market, but also in the way that you do policy. And if you do policies based on science, based on data, and the data and the evaluation is available and translated to the language of each part of the population is related with, the decision at the end will be something that is good for the society and something that is good for the country. But it's very important to add before that happen. We have to provide information regarding what is happening in the country, what implies to implement the energy transition with scientific information in order to do ethic policy.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for highlighting this, because unfortunately we see a lot of misinformation and disinformation still around that is being used to polarize and not do the right actions. Andre, you have 30 seconds to comment.
Yes, actually, I don't have a question, but actually knowledge sharing, also to reply to Conrad's question, and sharing practical experiences. One quite noticeable practice is being implemented by the Irish transmission system operator IRGrid, that in their participatory processes when it comes to grid planning, they establish community councils where community and the people representing the community decide by themselves where the costs, but mostly benefits of a project, of the infrastructure project at the local level would be distributed. This allows to keep the transparency as a mechanism that gives the ownership to the community about the decisions that they're going to make, and potential claims about the corruption or suspicions can be shifted away. So basically the answer is to shift the decision power in specific cases to the communities that would be affected by the infrastructure.
I think that's super interesting, and thank you so much for sharing this, Andre. I think it's a super interesting aspect, and where we also realize renewable energy is completely different. It's decentralized, and it's a chance to build up a new energy governance and a new governance, actually. So power dynamics fully change, and we sometimes we're the solution to bigger problems, right? That's why it's complex. So time has run out. I would really like to thank all of you, the presenters from round one, the panelists here, Rosalina, Irene, and Joni, for your contributions, the discussion. All the participants, it was really an active discussion. So I tried to bring in as many of the aspects as possible into the discussion. I think this is really, it's a continuation, but it's also a start for more discussions. Many questions raised, and we look forward to continue collaborating with all of you. I would like to thank from Renton One side also my colleagues Andrea and Yasmin for their work on this project and the preparation of the workshop, and Matt for the facilitation. Thanks to all. See you very soon. We will be at COP, so hope to see many of you there, and we stay in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And
thank you, everyone.
We've got the chat, we've got the recording, so we'll be in touch. So thank you for your time. Really appreciated.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.